Again, thank you for your efforts in sitting already this morning. It's a beautiful way to share a Saturday. Just come together and sit. I'm often reminded that, or I often have the feeling once I've sat for a couple of periods that it's really a shame to say anything, to talk, to do very much. It all seems to be, well, actually silence feels very welcoming in that way, and there's certainly a palpable shift in the quality of the energy, of the awareness of the room and of the group once we've made some effort in the realm of doing nothing, which sounds counterintuitive, but it turns out it requires some effort to do nothing, to refrain from doing various things, and to just return to what is most essential. So the 8 awarenesses of the enlightened person, it's interesting in the sense that this is a teaching credited to the final teaching of the Buddha, or close to the Buddha's passing, and it became a teaching in the Zen Master Dogen, who, for those of us who've practiced together for some time, often refer to Master Dogen's teachings, who was a Japanese Zen master of the 13th century, who, as a Japanese monk and teacher, didn't feel satisfied in his understanding or realization, and took the difficult journey by boat to China in order to find a teacher, somebody who he felt was clearer than he was and he could learn from. He eventually found that teacher, spent some years studying with him in China, and then returned to Japan. And Dogen was remarkable in many ways in that, as well as being a wonderful Dharma teacher, he was an accomplished writer, poet. He's an intellectual. That can seem counterproductive to Dharma practice sometimes, like the intellect can get in the way. But he's a real Renaissance man of a lot of different qualities. And he worked on a book around Dharma with many different fascicles, chapters on different points of practice. It's commonly thought that he meant to do 100, because I think he did 96 chapters or something, and then he became ill and died at quite a young age, at just 53. And the 8 awarenesses was his final writing, like the final chapter of where he got up to with Shobogenzo, his great work. So it's curious how those match, a final teaching of the Buddha, and then probably 1700 years or so later became the final teaching of Master Dogen. And here we are, 700 or 800 years later, looking at these same teachings. Of course, we look back to the Buddha or as a historical figure of great importance in a meditation tradition. And as I mentioned at the beginning, he was a great explicator of the human condition, to be able to diagnose what it is to be human, the things that cause us suffering, and then to develop a teaching that can help relieve unnecessary pain and suffering. Because it turns out, as human beings, we often create difficulty along the way, more difficulty than is intrinsically necessary. Right? There is old age, sickness, and death, and the facts of impermanence, but within that journey, we're certainly quite adept at making things worse. Right? It's like not all of it is worse, but if we look at the world and the sum total of the human condition over the centuries and the millennia, there's room for an improvement. I think we can all agree. Right? So towards the end of his life, and the Buddha looking at teaching to some close followers, close disciples of the Buddha, brought up these particular 8 awarenesses. Now, when we bring them up, they can seem somewhat random or kind of arbitrary, and I wondered about that, whether this was just sort of important to the Buddha at that time. You know, the teaching became kind of very simple and everyday and pointing out a few key things rather than having a very elegant structure to it. I'll just read what the 8 are, and of course, with any of these things, because these topics are so vast in scope, right, and then we devote a Saturday. We're going to look at the 8 awarenesses of enlightenment on a Saturday, and we'll be done in time that you can go and do some grocery shopping later or whatever. You know, you can fit in a run to Target before you go home. Like, so it's a little wild in that way to try to do that. But my aim is to maybe, like, you know, shine a light on these a little bit, and for something to strike you. And then if you're interested to pursue it more deeply, then you can, you know, I'd encourage you can find it for free online to be able to pull up that writing of Dogen, to pull up some of these words of the Buddha, and look into it some more if it grabs you or intrigues you in that way. With Dharma teaching, with Dharma talks, I think an efficient way to approach it is to just let everything in, and then whatever strikes you, that's the point of contact to drill in on, right? Something that turns you, where you're like, you know, something that's like maybe strikes you that feels like something, you know, or feels a little out of reach, or there's something there that really touches you. Those are the points of contact where you go in a little deeper, right? So I'll bring up the 8. Freedom from desire is number 1, right? Then satisfaction, serenity, meticulous effort or diligence, correct remembrance or right mindfulness, another way to say that. Samadhi, which is concentration. Prajna, which is wisdom. And finally, avoiding idle talk. I love that one at the end. The Buddha put that on. Apparently, as he was dying, he said, I'm about to die, I'm going to enter parinirvana. Please, everybody, be quiet. You know, it's just a very human thing. It's just like, you know, for God's sake, can we die in here? You know, can we have a bit of quiet? So that one comes in last, is avoided idle talk. I'll get into that more. So let's take the first 4. And I'm going to bring these up and say something on each one, but then encourage you again with this, you know, a listening here, see how this strikes you, and then invite anyone that would like to share a comment or question or bring something up. We'll open it up as we go through these. The first one, so freedom from desire. That certainly, to me, sounds very Buddhist in quality, right? To be free from desire. Let's all those who are free from desire raise our hands. Right? Thanks. I like kind of looked around to see if somebody wanted. But nobody. Why? You know, well, isn't it just a truth? It's just part of being human, right? We are desirous beings. Desire is always functioning in ways small or large in our life. Right? Now, it can sound very much like the path of the renunciate, you know, of a monk, of a nun, to say, I will be free from all desire, not to desire anything at all. Which, you know, curiously and marvelously, might be one hell of a desire. to be like kind of ironically, right? I wish to be free from I desire to be free from desire, right? And that's not to demean or to diminish people's efforts to minimize their desires or to work on reducing the desirous mind. I don't mean to minimize that, but let's look at it to say freedom from desire. If we begin at the point and own the fact, as we all did right from the beginning, that desire is just inherent to the human condition, well, how can we possibly be free of it? How can we be free of it? But in our practice, this morning, when we come in and we devote time to meditation, what is it that we are doing during that time? Right? We're being still and quiet, and it's suggested to us that we let go of picking and choosing, of preference for inner content or external content. So right there is the surrendering of pursuing desire. Desire is always there, or preference is always there in one way. You know, so for myself, I was sitting in the first period, and I thought, we don't need that fan on, do we? I can hear the fan kind of rotating around. It's just like, huh. And then it's like, well, okay. And then there's a choice, right? There's a choice, really, or maybe there's no choice in the beginning, but with practice, with awareness, then the choice opens up. Am I going to suffer with that, or am I going to let it go? Can I allow something that triggers in a minor or ultimately a major way, can I allow something to occur to notice a reaction, a desire for it to be different, but then it's enough, perhaps, to just notice it and allow it to be, including one's own reaction, right? This is what it is to start to create space and freedom around desire and around preference, right? We're always picking and choosing and rearranging the present moment and trying to manipulate reality toward some end that fits our agenda as human beings. That's positive and negative. It's not a matter of good and bad. But in the practice of meditation, preference is a hindrance, because we would rather it be a certain way, and that rather it be a certain way gets in the way and demeans this experience now. This experience now that is occurring, as it is always this way. Fundamentally, it's always this same experience. All that's different is the content, right? The shifting and changing of form, our own body, mind, the experience of everyone else's body, mind, the world around us. We're living in this sea of impermanent and changing forms. Now, and our desires are completely entangled in that world of form, naturally preferring one thing over another. Again, so it's not about, okay, I am now going to cut off wanting anything and I will just be completely satisfied with this. That can sound nice as an idea, but in practice it doesn't work that way, right? At the root, our practice is one of awareness, of bringing awareness to everything, or allowing awareness to fill everything, right? So you can see, like, our desires, our wants and our preferences, it's kind of like furniture in the room. right? So you've got things are set up a certain way, and maybe we'd like to move the furniture around to suit, like we might do at home, right? So we have that desire and that bias to want to change things, right? But awareness practice, or to have freedom from desire, is to rather become aware of and sit as and be the empty space within which everything appears. So being the empty, when you sit, you can sit as the empty space in the room. And then there's all kinds of furniture and people and sounds and everything that's happening. But if you can be the awareness that doesn't pick and choose, then we can really allow, there's freedom to allow things to be as they are. Because things are as they are, whether we like that or not. So if we can align with things as they are, then we can realize freedom around the desire to change things. You don't turn that desire to change things off, but you have there is freedom, then there is some choice around whether to pursue that desire or not. Now, of course, this telescopes out and branches into many different ways. If the Buddha talked about knowing yourself. That kind of comes in one of these steps too. So it's important to, in our own life, to know our kind of deepest desires, as it were, right? To know what it is that we want and to know what those desires are. And again, not to call them good or bad or try and match them to some standard or narrative about what is an accepted desire or not, but rather with awareness to look into that and to fact check it against reality, to measure it against reality, and to see that this desire that I have, is it achievable? What is it that I am actually bringing light of awareness? What is it I'm actually pursuing here? And what will the impact be for myself and for others if I pursue this desire or achieve this desire? Because at the root, Buddhism is a system of reducing suffering and promoting benefit. And desires often get us into trouble. Desires will often lead us into suffering or into difficulty. So again, we bring awareness to how desire functions in our life with space, being able to see it from, like, meditation is being able to see oneself from 50,000 feet, right? It's a macro landscape where you see how this one here, the me self, is functioning in the world, but with some detachment, with a step back, where you can look at your own life, your own functioning, your own desire, the way that we orient ourselves, our patterns. It's endless in that sense, right? And to unpack that and to make adjustments, there are many different ways that we can practice. We can use therapy, we can use all kinds of different techniques. But the technique of meditation is to take the broad, impersonal look and to be that great container, that empty space that allows everything to be as it is without preference. Then you can really see. Then you can really see how it actually is. Not with a story or a lens around it, but just with the cold eye of reality. What is this? What are these desires? How is this functioning? With some space and some freedom, and then have the ability to choose whether to pursue these things or not, or whether to bring in some reinforcements to help you whether to pursue these things or not. So, that's how it strikes me, as freedom from desire. There's no escaping desire. Desire will always function, but the freedom is to be able to experience desire in a broader container where you preserve choice around desire. But again, this is a human, as much as possible. as much as possible. Yeah, just having that very practical example just in the tea break, where I look and I'm like, so I should eat some fruit, but those little round donuts look good. Right? And I'm just trying to keep the sugar down or just focus on the carbs, and I'm like, so I know what I'll do. I'll have one of the donut things and 2 pieces of fruit, and that way, that feels like a good trade-off. But then I repeated that 3 times, so it's probably that's where I'm at with desire. But I've had my fruit for the day, so that part's good. But there's that mapping out in ways minor and major, though. This is what I want. Now, what are the likely consequences for myself and others, and is it worth the cost? In an honest assessment, knowing that the results are actually incalculable, and you can only have a best guess at it. It's just like, what do I choose here in this moment? And that happens every day in ways small and large. So freedom from desire. Okay, I should move on. We got 8 of these things to get to, so we got to get cracking. Satisfaction is the second one. One of the great 8 awarenesses of the enlightened person is satisfaction. Being satisfied. Yeah. How does that strike you? There's a Zen teacher, Joshu, who said, who once asked, can you value this without reservation? And the emphasis is on the this there. Can you value this without reservation? Are you satisfied? Are we satisfied with this? This appearance, this expression, this dharma, this life. This life. Imagine that. Imagine being satisfied with this life. Right? Can we be satisfied? Like satisfaction, I feel often goes awry if our satisfaction is predicated on something, a form, a thing, a person, or an event. Like if our satisfaction is contingent on circumstances or reality matching up, then we're always at risk of disappointment, right? Like often when Susan and I, when we drive here, we stop at Starbucks at the bottom of the mountain. We get off the mountain and into the civilized world, right? Anyway, and there's like before we get on the freeway, there's a Starbucks, so it's often that's like the first port of call. Get off the mountain, get down there, get a fancy cup of coffee, and then that's fuel for kind of driving in. That's just kind of part of the process. Have you ever had that happen where you drop, what is it, best part of $6 on your, unless I'm the only one doing this, and you're all like, what, you spend money on that stuff? You get your $5 or your $6 splurge coffee, and then you taste it, and you're just like, oh, it's not right, that. So I'm a bit disappointed in that. It looks so good on the thing, the new thing with the cream and the extra what have you, or they put the lid on the crease, and then you get the spill thing, especially like when you're driving. Has that ever happened to you? It's just that kind of thing. It's just like, can I be satisfied with this now? Am I satisfied with this? Am I satisfied with this morning? I really ask myself how I raise the value of that when I get up in the day. And I'll often say it's a beautiful day. That's kind of a practice for me. I've really fallen into the habit of noticing the beauty of the day and then saying something to someone about it. I don't know, maybe probably people are like, oh, here he goes, it's a beautiful day today, isn't it? But it really is. And it's a reminder for myself to be, are we satisfied with this? Like, can we value this experience? You know, I recently, I had a medical thing that I had to a procedure and something, and I was waiting on some results, and there was a little bit of confusion around the around the results, and enough so that there was some like real worry that it was you know, like bad news. You know, that was the way that it came across. And I had that moment, no matter how long sat or practiced or whatever, just had that moment of just stark fear, you know? Where it's just like, oh no, maybe my number's up, you know? That kind of thing. And then to experience that, and then to, okay, start to go through that and deal with it, and just deal with reality as it is, ask some questions, get into it. And then very fortunate for my little self over here, things were fine and things resolved. And it reminded me, no matter how much I might say it, but to appreciate and value this experience of being alive now, right? And yet, that quality of this now, alive now, this is so precious and I'm appreciative of it, wore off by about 1 o'clock in the afternoon. in the same, but then it's like, I'm back to taking it for granted again. You know, and that's like, again, that's just like part of us as human beings. We just settle back into that kind of default functioning. But satisfaction, if we look at the conditions of our life, the person that we are, you know, we talked about desire at the beginning, we can really bring that question to ourselves and ask, is this enough? Is this enough? Is this life, is this enough? There's a wonderful koan in the Zen school, where, yeah, this would be a heck of a diversion if I got into this koan. It's about a page long and has about 30 points to it. So, but it's about a broken fan, right? It's called Enkan's fan. It's about a broken fan, and there's a comment in it. The important comment for me is when a teacher commenting on it, on this broken fan, says, that's the one I want, that's the one that I want, this broken fan. Again, it's hard to bring out much about this, about the context of the whole koan, but the point is, this life as it is, this Zen teacher was able to say, that's the one I want. And it really, I remember reading this, or looking at this line, and it really challenged me to say, this life, my life, the one that it actually is it the one, is this, or do I want another one? How deep that runs, that I want it to be another life. I want it to be a different way. I'm heading somewhere else. When I get there, when we reach this point, when we're able to move, when we're able to, you know, we have these demarcation points in the future. When this, then I'll be able to. And, you know, and then just kick our satisfaction down, kick that can down the road. And it can be helpful in a sense of, then we always have that, you know, it's kind of like a carrot to go toward, gives us something to work toward, like I was talking about with attainment. You know, you kind of, something to aim for can function in a positive way. But this deeper sense of satisfaction is that honest appraisal, and to be able to reveal that to oneself and say, is this life, this world, as it is, this right now, is this enough? Is it satisfying enough? And if it's not, then why? And what is that? Because we might have just cooked something up. You know, an idea, a desire, an expectation. We're relying on something to change. There's some unspoken contract with reality, which we are the only one who signed it. Reality didn't sign. Right? So that's a real entry point for us as Dharma practitioners to look and say, is this satisfying? Is this enough? Okay. Serenity. Serenity is the third one. So we've had freedom from desire, satisfaction, and 8 awarenesses of enlightenment. 1, to have serenity, or equanimity. Now, I was reading something about the Buddha, what the Buddha had to say about this, and it was quite interesting because he talks about solitude, about being able to be solitary, to be able to experience and to allow solitude as a way to realize or experience serenity, which I think that's quite interesting, right? So I mean, again, do we all feel serene? Is there a little bit like kind of a low simmer of serenity going on, right? So we have it in a relative sense where there is peace and serenity, and of course then there's also the deeper felt experience or sense of to be serene and to be still, right? Serenity and is close to stillness in this way. To be serene, to be here and to be allowing of this world, of this life. Now we've been bringing in, I thought that was interesting about solitude. I was reading about, and there was a quote where it said that to live with others is to be hindered by others. But that's so. And I'm just like, wow, that's like, there's like a renunciate monk thing to say. You're around other people, you're going to be disturbed, and your serenity of your mind is going to be disturbed. But, as a human being, you could say, yeah, that's so, right? I mean, I think about most of my problems and my issues and challenges and the things that disturb me. 99.975% of them to do with my relationships to other people, right? It's like living at the Zen Center. I have no argument with the mountains or the trees there, or even the squirrels, or the ants, or any of these things. They don't disturb my peace in the same way that another person disturbs one's peace. Right? There is that aspect. I think it's interesting, but we're householders, I think, for the most part, right? We live connected with family, with friends, and with community. There's always noise. There's always disturbance. There's always a dealing with there. Right? So ours is not a way that we escape that. It's like, okay, I'm going to step out and cut off all worldly attachments. In order, it's just going to be me and the morning star. It's just going to be me and this mountain, and then I can encounter serenity. That may be so, but there's going to be a lot of cost. There's a lot of cost in achieving that aspect of serenity. For us, it's like it's really we have the big challenge to experience and realize serenity within or despite the churn of relationships and other people and all of these interactions, the world at large, and then what is it there to be able to cultivate or experience serenity? I'm asking you. I mean, how does this strike you in this way? There's also, again, this is aspects of these, how an enlightened or an awakened person appears. Right? The Buddha's talking about that. Well, an awakened person, somebody who is present and aware, often transmits that aura or that energy of being serene, right? Of being awake and aware. It might be in difficult circumstances, but they're here now, and there's a settledness, there's an awareness, there's a groundedness in people, there's a serenity that can emerge from being just directly present with things, even when, or especially when, the circumstances are very challenging. The energies are very high. You see a developed practitioner, whether they're Buddhist or not, but a practitioner of the human condition, you see that in somebody that's accomplished when they're able to maintain their center, they're able to still listen, they're able to still be here and present for each of us, even when everything around might be in uproar. Right? And again, that serenity can be realized and found in our meditation practice. So meditation practice is where we go to fill the gas tank so that can be there. Right? You experience serenity. We can all experience some serenity in still sitting, sat in this nice chapel space, and it's all good on that level. And there's we're setting up a container where we've got a good chance of encountering even a little bit of serenity. We come to know that serenity, know its impersonal quality, like it's not me, it's not my serenity, but you're encountering and realizing a serenity that is fundamentally always here. This still point, this still awareness that is serene, is always in appearance, often though it's obscured by the churn of our thoughts, feelings, emotions, and everything that's going on, especially when those are colliding with another person or another group's thoughts, feelings, and perceptions. But that underneath, that serenity is never absent. But it takes effort in practice to reveal it and then find it and continue to return to it during our everyday experience. It's a good question for us when we're practicing, is to ask that. It's just like, where is the serenity now? Where's the serenity now? The fourth one is meticulous effort or diligence. Diligence, I think, a very practical aspect of diligence is to have that regular practice, to have a steady practice. You as much as you can, it's good to keep the water. You got to keep the water hot. You got to keep it hot. That's been my experience in Zen practice or Dharma practice. It's been that way on retreats, and it's that way in everyday practice. So that diligence of being able to, the diligence or to be able to return, quite simply, we don't have to make it complicated, but that returning over and over to the present experience as it is. To coming back to being present and to coming back to being, it says meticulous effort here. That's meticulous. Meticulous talks about that's pointing at a quality of careful attention again. A meticulous effort. You can have effort which is just like this sort of broad kind of hammer stroke effort of things. Sometimes we go after things in an effort like that way. But I like to look at meditation and practice as an economy of effort. It's like using effort in a skillful way, applying a meticulous or a careful effort into how one. And when I talk about practice in this way, I mean Dharma practice is synonymous with just everyday lived practice of being a human being, which is what Dharma practice is. But we don't have to put it out there as being something special or something different than what we're doing. If we got rid of all these words, Dharma, Buddha, Samadhi, and threw all of that out, we'd still be a group of human beings who are interested in understanding this mystery that we're involved in a little better in order to bring the positives and let the negatives go, even if we'd never used these words. That requires effort. It requires a showing up and a certain meticulous nature or a diligence to keep applying these ways. Because if we find, often as human beings, we find a way that brings benefit, and we know it brings benefit, but then we put it off, or we right. It's like the gym memberships. They always sell more in January, right? It's after the Christmas gluttony and the New Year and everything, and then they have all of the deals on at the gym, and everyone's like, all right, that's it. I'm going this time. I'm going. Have we all done it, right? In one way or another. It's doing it this way. I'm going to go for it, right? So that's how it is with practice, though. That's how it is with practice. You get knocked down 9 times, you get up 10 times. That's the diligence. That's the diligence, you know. Practice is like it's a process of loss, in one sense. It's a process of failure, of one sense, in one sense. It's losing everything that's extra, and losing those expectations of that striving. Right? So let that just keep returning over and over, and trusting in this one here, trusting in this life now, the way that it's all arranged. Because as surely as you're sitting there and I'm sitting here, and there's the mural on the wall and the sky above and the earth below, no matter how much control or choice we may feel we have within this, it is always the way that it is. And our diligence and our effort is in returning to that fundamental truth, that fundamental isness. You know, returning to this awareness, this life as it's appearing now, over and over and over and over. You know, because you trust this place, this mind, this appearance, this expression as it is now. You learn to really know that one and trust that one. Then, you know, practice is always available. Practice is very straightforward. You're not looking for something called practice or something called the Dharma or something called realization. It's always this Dharma, this realization, this right now. Back to our 8 awarenesses. When I first heard about this particular teaching in our Zen school, I heard about the first 4 of these 8, which Zen's very fond of reducing down and pulling out core parts and having short systems. And so even for these 8 awarenesses, they're sometimes reduced to 4 awarenesses, the first 4. We talked about those: freedom from desire, satisfaction, serenity, and meticulous effort or diligence. The way I first encountered these, it was said to be, in place of freedom from desire, is want little, which is an interesting spin on freedom from desire. Perhaps it's not reasonable to want nothing. We talked about not being the absence of desire, but that's maybe not achievable in the human condition. But we can want a few things. Want little. If we want a little, it might be more. It's more doable. It's more achievable and more reasonable to want little. That might be more achievable in a human life. So want little, know how to be satisfied. This is an interpretation of satisfaction, a little different. Know how to be satisfied. So that's the active discovery, finding out or exploring what it is that actually satisfies us. Because that may not be clear. It might not be clear. We may pursue certain things thinking they'll be satisfactory only to find that they're not, and really there's a deeper mechanism that's underway there that is looking to be satisfied. Want little, know how to be satisfied, know what it is that satisfies you. I can list a few things I find quite satisfying. Want little, know how to be satisfied, enjoy peace and tranquility. That's the other interpretation of serenity. So enjoy peace and tranquility. I mean, and foster and create the conditions for peace and tranquility in order for serenity to be experienced. So each one of us, we can look at it in that way. How do we foster the container for serenity? How do we create, what is it that can bring peace and tranquility? For many of us, that can just be time alone, quiet time in nature. For others, it's it can be anything at all. But if we're honest about, and we really see what that is for us, and then we don't measure it against an idealized spiritual standard, and we also let go of the influence and narrative of others that is being imposed from the outside for what it is that satisfies us and brings us peace and tranquility. We see how much of that functions in a human life, how much we might be, there's a narrative around us for like how one ought to be, how one should be. Many of us kind of grow up with a big sense of how we should be to match other people's expectations. In this practice, again, it's a matter of knowing the self, knowing this one here. Both the one that is always awake and aware and is functioning before the name, the history, and the story. We know that one. We practice knowing that one. That's the lens of meditation, to come to realize and know that nameless, vast aspect, the impersonal awareness that we all are at the root. But it also includes the one with the name, with the history, with the stories, the me self who we share our heads with, like a kind of frustrating roommate. That's like how it is, living with I, kind of have to share the space up here and get along somehow, right? So in exploring that, and really again coming to know the self, all these aspects of self from an experiential standpoint, free of bias as much as possible, whether it's an external prejudice, external bias, or our own ideas, like a spiritual bias or some idea of how we should be. Many of us have that voice that says we should be a certain way, shouldn't be another way. So, and then the final one in this other interpretation of the first four is remember who you are. Remember who you are, and that's here we looked at that as diligence, right? Doesn't seem to match maybe a diligence or an effort, but a returning, about remembering is don't forget, don't let it fade into the background. Remember who you are in your essence. Remember who you are as this broad, vast awareness within which the whole world, including me, is taking place. Right? So it's that essence, that beginning. Remember who you were when you were a little child. Before the history, before the story, before all the joys and the traumas and everything else that shapes the sense of me identity. So remember who you are in that sense. And for a practitioner, a Dharma practitioner, that remembrance is found every time you sit down, every time we come back to meditation. And that bell is a call to remember. Remember who you are. Remember what this is. Right? That doesn't have to. That remembrance isn't a remembrance which is a knowledge or something fixed, but it's rather the remembering that this is unfixed and ungraspable. But that's where the freedom really dwells, in the unfixed and in the ungraspable. Always just remembering and returning to this. We'll go on with the fifth of the 8 awarenesses. Correct remembrance, or right mindfulness. Right mindfulness. Again, we talked about how the Eightfold Path is kind of interwoven with this one. A right mindfulness. As we live our lives as practitioners, the opportunities for mindfulness practice are endless. Mindfulness practice is really a 24/7, 365, never closed practice. Right mindfulness, right, is really to be intimately involved with things as they are. You know, in the Eightfold Path, we have right view, see things as they are. So see reality without the lens, without the filter, without the conditioned, biased mindset that is always filtering the world and coming up with conclusions. Rather, directly experience and see it as it is. Right? So we put that first with right view. Now, the right mindfulness, if we look at this word, which has really became a popular one over the last 10 or 20 years with the way mindfulness came into the popular zeitgeist and the practice. You know, it has its darker side with companies realizing if we get people really aware and focused, we can squeeze even more out of them. You know, so there's right mindfulness. But look at, like, if we look just at the word mindfulness, right? So the mind as it appears now, which is how we experience it now, then what is it full of? Right mindfulness is to be full of the present experience. So everything is felt and everything is noticed. You notice the fan. I hope you notice the fan. I notice the fan. Maybe it doesn't reach over there. So we can move it in a bit so everyone gets to experience the fan. But the right mindfulness is a fullness of experience of the present. Right? So you're hearing what is heard, whether that's sound or silence, what is being felt and experienced in the body right here and now. Right? Now, without that mindfulness, then it's more of a mind scatteredness, or a mind that is out of sync with the present. And we experience that when we're lost in dwelling in past circumstance or memory of the way things were. Always like harkening back to the way things were. Of course, that can be really skewed in us as a trauma, where that is always, the past is always there. There's a wound there that needs to be felt and addressed and hopefully eventually healed. But if we're living in a place where we're displaced to the past overly, or displaced to the future, right? Always like that would be my particular poison. It's like I don't think really hardly ever about the past. I don't think so in my own experience. But I always think about the future. Like what's coming up. Not so much next week or in a few days. I leave that to my Google Calendar to tell me. I get up in the morning, I'm like, oh, look at that, that's what I'm doing. I try and outsource near-term future, but longer-term future and what the next big thing may be, or what, where I want to end up. Like my mind will fantasize or like run in those fields quite a lot. Now, of course, if we live in such a way where we're like living in the future to the detriment of the present, like this right now is not satisfactory, this is a prison, this is a terrible thing that I'm enduring right now, and I'm going to suffer until I get where I want to go, then again, as human beings, we're out of sync with the present mindfulness, the present experience. You know, lost in the future or lost in the past and missing the fullness of the experience of the present. Right? And that experience of mindfulness of the present appears in the mundanity of everything that we're doing all day. Right? As spiritual practitioners, sometimes we have things which appear to be special, you know, special states of mind, and things which are more mundane or ordinary. And we have a value system as human beings over things that are valuable, things that are not. But a key part of Dharma practice is, again, just in the same in the art of meditation, is to check the value system, let the value system go, and experience things as they are without that value system, or at least with that value system set aside. That way you can enter into everyday activities which we may find boring, frustrating, or a pain, right? And then learn to actually enjoy them as we apply right mindfulness, a full mind to that. You know, my favorite example of that is taking care of the cat litter box. Right? They have these little mats that catch the litter, but it all kind of gets trapped in the corner and underneath the skirting board a little bit. So it's a whole. You could do a quick job on it, but it's better if you take it out, take it apart, pull the mats out, kind of sweep, do a thing, replace. You know, the cats love it. They come and watch. We have 2 cats, and they like to come and watch while this is happening. And then always, like pretty much always, as soon as it's done, it's perfect, and I put it back and I have a moment of satisfaction, that's a job well done. One of them at least will be like, you know, it's funny because I've got to go. You know, they like to use it like immediately after. And that's a great lesson in life right there. Just as things are perfect, something's going to come along and shift that, right? But same thing with vacuum it, you know, whether it's whatever it is for you, running the vacuum around, you know, going to the grocery store, just these chores, you know, often we'll have that ranking system of what's fun and what's not. You know, sometimes it would be, I remember I worked a variety of jobs, and I had a factory job years ago in Wales, and a lot of people, you know, and me too to some degree, but a lot of people would really live for the weekend. It was all about the weekend, you know. So you go into Monday, everyone's depressed, and this is the UK, working class town, so also hungover. So we just, you know, Monday would be hangover day, everyone's miserable. Tuesday, still a bit miserable. Wednesday, halfway through, you know, it's like hump day, like halfway, almost done. Like that's, do you ever go, you know, sometimes I go in a store and I like to talk with people and I'd be like, how's it? It's busy, huh? So, you know, we kind of make a little small talk and be like, wow, it's really busy. And they're like, yeah, it's good though, because it just goes so fast, you know. And I said to somebody, I think it was at a Trader Joe's or something like that, and I said, yeah, we'll all be dead soon. You know, and they were like so checked by that, you know, just like, I'm, you know, strange guy who says something like that. But it's true, right? So it's like, be careful what you wish for. It's like, but it's gonna. Can we delete that part? Right? So, you know.
That's perfect.
Yeah. But it's like what we experience, you know. A lot of our days are actually full of everyday mundane activities that we do day in and day out. So if we have, again, the value system of what's sort of like bothersome and not really worth doing, and we're just living for the weekend and living for the high point, then we miss out on the greater content of our life. And back to that statement of Master Joshu's where he said, can you value this without reservation? Always this. That's right, mindfulness. The mind is full as this, appearing as this, satisfied as this. But we're always challenged in that way, and that's why it's a practice. We may be, I'm going to sit down in this and then realize, oh, it's hot. Wish it was cool. It isn't. Decision point. Create story and suffer, or surrender, allow. Surrender, allow, and even enjoy. Right? But that's not just like a show the throat passive abandonment. That is the surrender to circumstances and conditions as they are, and then actively respond in order to improve those conditions. Bring a second fan in is a good example of that. Right? So it's the way that it is, allow it to be the way that it is, and then look for the appropriate response that improves things. Right? So we're always in that, we're not in a place of passivity with practice, we're always in the place of acceptance, seeing, and then appropriate response coming from that place of centeredness. The next one is concentration. So we had the concentration practice, and how was that? Maybe I'll just open it up for like, did people work with breath practice, and was that a little different for you? I wonder if there's any comments or feedback on the concentration meditation. Yeah. So you find you can count and think about a bunch of stuff at the same time.
I was trying it.
Yeah. That is a very common thing with this practice.
Yeah.
People just like say like, oh, what are you working on? I'm counting breaths. How is that? And you get in, so you're thinking and counting. Yeah. Okay. That's the time then to be like, and that's why we really stress that real deep, resonant kind of dissolving count. Like, so you pour yourself into the number. If you do that, you claim a lot of bandwidth for awareness. That's often, myself, it's when we do the retreats, I'll often count breaths the first period when we do a block, because we do these blocks of 3 periods several times a day. The first one I do breath counting, because it's such a, it's able to set that, like what you're talking, sets that foundation. Otherwise I can try, just sitting and just be kind of off to the races without really settling down. So it's a powerful way to really center yourself. Yeah, that's the alternative to counting, is the different practice, is just that awareness. It tends to be a subtler point of contact. Easy, counting is like a real good carrot on a stick for many. It's right in front, the carrot's right there, you just got to count. And following the breath, the subtlety and the never-endingness of it, there's no accomplishment in it. Whereas there's a little bit of a reward in the counting meditation. It's like, oh, I'm making some progress. I can count to 10 or return to 1. This is, you feel something. But that's not so with breath following. It's a never ending. And it's a little subtler because it tends to be lighter in terms of the breathing. So it's, you can use one, you can use the other, try different things, but they tend to have resonance with different people. Some people like to count, others like to follow. Some people like to count to 6. others like to count and think about stuff too. It's like we got lots of different ways. But I'm a breath counter at heart. You know, it's like I did that for the first year when I came into Zen practice, and it's always been there for me, just naturally. If particularly in times where if I feel emotionally disturbed, say, but you know, I have an argument or there's some problem with usually someone, right? We talked about that. Usually it's people. Something's going on and we feel a little perturbed. And then when I go to the hall to sit, then naturally I'll find myself counting breaths. But I never had the conversation with myself that I'm going to count breaths. It's just like my mind will just go there as like a point of as a refuge in sitting if I'm not concentrating. It'll just go back to it. It just goes to counting typically. And it's an extraordinary thing. You just see the subtlety, because I'll notice that, and then there's a part of the mind that is observing the fact that a part of the mind is counting without any conscious effort or choice to do so. You're like, oh, that's interesting. Who's counting? Who's watching? Who's watching this happen or unfold? You know, we tend to have that tight grasp on the sense of me, like me self, that is doing these things. But as you get deeper with meditation, you see that this the chimeric quality of like that me self, which is like ungraspable, indistinct, and there is something else there that isn't involved in me. In fact, the greater part of experience is not mine, right? But me loves the lens. It's like likes to hug the lens, or keeps control, hold the wheel really tightly. But when I look at it, it says, yeah, that me self is really a small part with a big say in things. Okay, we're on to 7. We're making good progress this afternoon. I know it's 8. There's quite a lot to bring up, but 7 is wisdom. We have a word prajna and the word wisdom. And as we know in Dharma practice, wisdom isn't the usual use of wisdom. It's not it's not book-learned wisdom, or it's not Gandalf or Dumbledore wisdom. It's that might be a bit closer, I don't know. But it's not learning things or knowing in an intellectual knowledge kind of way. Like wisdom is not that. If I go back to something the Buddha said about wisdom, I like this. He said, wisdom is a sturdy ship crossing the sea of old age, sickness, and death. Right? So wisdom's like a sturdy ship in that sense. And I find that interesting. I like the analogy of our life. This life is like sailing a boat. So we have this is my dinghy right here, right? You've got you're in your raft, and we're all on this, I was going to say adrift, maybe we're not adrift. Right? It's a nice regatta, we got a nice regatta going, right? But we're like boats on an ocean. We're like boats on an ocean of presence. Like life is this vast ocean that we're appearing on or in, right? And so if we look at like our practice or our life like a boat in that way, that is sailing on in the ocean, that's presence, and then you've got circumstances coming along, and that's like the weather. Right, so you could be saying, like, you don't really have any control over the weather, so you don't know what's coming. It could be stormy next week, or we could be in for another heat wave. right? So we can't control the weather, and in the same way in life, you can't control the circumstances. Although you may know where certain weather is likely to be calm and certain weather is likely to be stormy. And you can dwell appropriately in a place more conducive to good weather. Does that make sense? It's like there are difficult circumstances, and we learn where difficult circumstances will often emerge from, and we can avoid those places if we're, that's right, stay the boat, don't go to the area that has all of the hard weather, right? But now, if you ever, have you had that experience being like kind of maybe kind of down here, many of you have had the experience of being on a boat in the ocean. I had that experience one time on a sailboat off the coast here with a friend, and I thought it was going to be a kind of a kickback time. Yeah, there's a few you have like boat experience, like a small sailboat. I thought it'd just be sort of lounging, and then I realized I was there to work. It's like, okay, hold this, and you got to watch this. And I'm like, what? And what is this? Like, what does this do? And the whole thing was that it was a beautiful sailing day, and there's a bit of wind, but I realized it needed a lot of attention, and it's not like you got a shovel, you're just digging a hole in the ground, but it's like it's a wisdom, it's a refined effort that comes from a focused attention, where you're always adjusting. And I love this analogy for the boat in that sense as wisdom for how we navigate life, right? It's like the water's changing, the conditions are changing. There's a little bit of swell, there's a bit of chop coming. Clouds ahead, right? Christmas is coming, it looks like we may have a storm on the horizon, depending on your circumstances, right? Right? Whatever that might be. And then you steer and sail your boat accordingly, right? So it's a matter of like, okay, meeting these it's like taking the sail in a little bit, turn it. It starts to break down here because I know very little about it, so I just know that you do this and something happens with the sail. But wisdom is taken in Dharma in that is more that sense, right? The response to things, which a lot of that does come out of lived experience, right? There's wisdom gained from just surviving this long in the world, right? Like all of us here, like we reached this point, there's been some good fortune too. There's been some luck along the way, but it's also been, this is a fruit of wisdom, of learning. You learn how life actually works, right? You never get it completely down. There is always room for improvement, right? And we continue to make mistakes, but then if we're learning from those mistakes and that improves our sailing knowledge, that goes in the log. Right? We used to have these logs, the sailors of old. I remember reading around the sailors who discovered, countries or continents and those, and their logbooks would be priceless. Right? They would just be priceless because they had just recorded on a daily every day. They'd be writing in there what they encountered. And it's that way for us as we go forward in life. We're always writing in that log. Experiencing things and then learning and hopefully making careful adjustments so that we can stay ever more on course. And if we're functionally, well oriented, then that course we're setting is always toward safe harbor. Right? We're out into things, but we're always sailing toward, I feel, safe harbor. Most of us would like that. I'm going to sail this, but I'm also kind of would like to have a rest and take the hand off the tiller. Yeah. Okay. Well, I'm going to move on into our final of the 8, which I think is it's so curious that it ends on avoiding idle talk. Right, I brought up at the beginning how apparently when the Buddha was close to his passing, he said, "I'm about to enter Parinirvana. Please be quiet." Can everybody please be quiet? Avoid idle talk. I read Dogen's comments, Master Dogen's comments on idle talk, and he called it hollow speech. Speech that doesn't really have anything at the heart of it. It's just words. It's just talking for the sake of talking, which is fine. Susan and I were, like, lunchtime, we took a walk around, and we just ate something out on the street. I forget what's the busy one, and all the stores, and this one. Second Street. We just went on Second Street, and then we kind of sat down there, and then I knew I had the vibe as soon as I sat down, but I was close to somebody. I'm just like, oh, this person is not going to stop talking. It's just had that clear energy of just a non-stop, just throwing it out there. It could be, and then it's like, so again, it's that decision point. Well, I can sit, allow, and then just surrender to that. But, thinking about it, why don't we just move over here? As a way to, and that's like an easy, practical way to kind of relieve suffering in that way. Prefer quiet, or prefer some silence, and enjoy, watch the people passing up and down the street. Right? Hollow speech, he said, yeah, that's sometimes like at spiritual communities, like at the Zen center, like at Zen centers and places like that. You get issues with gossip and that kind of speech. That's why it's a precept in Buddhist communities. They have, from the 10 precepts, there's 2 precepts about speaking. It's like, one, don't discuss another's errors and faults, and the other one is don't raise yourself up and denigrate and put down others, which are usually involved in a lot of those in speech, talking about somebody's errors and faults. That othering and splitting and separating that comes from doing that. When we talk about so-and-so's like this, and we're like this, so we feel better because we're in this tribe and they're in that tribe, and we don't like them. And all of that dangerous division and separation, which I'm saying that, I'm just like, I do that. It's like, I think we all do that as human beings. But Dogen talked about, the hollow speech, in that when we converse, when we talk, let's it should have some value or some utility. Like, it has some purpose. Would you like a cup of tea? That reminds me, just to digress, I brought up Master Joshu before, and there's a wonderful koan with Master Joshu where he's having tea with the local superintendent. It always says that in the translation. A local political person in China. He's having tea with him, and he pours him some tea. And then a young monk comes by who's just been at and Joshu calls him over and says, "How long have you been here now?" And he says, "Just a couple of weeks." He says, "Is that so?" He says, "Have a cup of tea." He goes, "Oh, thank you." And then somebody else is coming by, and he's like, "Hey," calls him over, and he says, "How long have you been at this temple?" And he goes, "I'm in my 10th year." And he goes, "Oh, is that so? Have a cup of tea." And then the superintendent, and then they leave, and the superintendent says, "You asked the first person how long you've been here, and they said a short time, and you offered them tea. And he asked the other person, he said a long time, and you offered him tea. What's the difference there?" And Joshu said, "Superintendent?" He said, "Yeah." He said, "Have a cup of tea." That's all there was there, right? Whether it's a short time or a long time. The offering was just, "Hello, monk, practitioner, person," and a little small talk. "How long you been here?" Maybe you already knew. But the important part was the offering, a greeting, the sharing a gift, in that case some tea, and then a parting, and then whatever's next. So, in avoiding idle talk, it's so much of speech with human beings, so much of it will end in regrettable circumstances. Right? How many schemes, narrative, plots, divisions and things that are just cooked up by people talking to one another. Oh my gosh, look at the disaster of social media. That was meant to be a good thing, wasn't it? I'm not sure it is. Look how that has distorted any kind of objective truth or to reality, right? Just through speech, hollow speech, the sharing of something that doesn't have any real value. And this was important to the Buddha at the end, but the Buddha, he led a big community of practitioners, and that's trouble. A big group of people living together is trouble all the time. It's that way in people sometimes come to the Zen Center at Yokoji or live and say, "Oh, I wish I could live. It must be wonderful living up here. It must be so." And imagine, quite naturally, that it's so much more difficult, so much different to living in the world. The circumstances are different, but people are the same. People are the same everywhere you go. The difference with a spiritual community is you can't separate and hide or create your place where you can be in private and not act that out on one another. In a spiritual community, it's all getting revealed. But it's meant to be revealed in order so that those things can be worked on, and then those things can be transformed. And sometimes it even works, just a little bit. And I have to watch myself. Avoid idle speech, right? Let's avoid idle talk, and that's a reminder for these talks. We look at these ways, but anything that I say or anything I can comment on here. That's my clumsy effort to share something of my experience of practice in a commentary in these ways. But it's really of no use to you. It's just a reminder. It's a pointer to provoke your own inquiry, your own knowing, your own heart. It's a reminder that reminds you to look. Remember who you are. See what work, if any, you need to do. See what needs to be clarified there. All of these words, all these talks, is just a pointer back to the original nature that you already are, that is already awake and aware, and has all 8 attributes of enlightenment, and many, many more, too many to count.